Hey Wargamers, recently the Leagues of Votann Codex popped up online, and we're getting close enough now to the release date that I want to take a stab at reviewing it. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take kind of a broad scale look at the Codex as a whole, looking at the different units, at the Stratagems, at the Relics, at the different leagues. We'll go through all those different things. We'll touch on the warlord traits and the mission objectives a little bit, but not as much as those other things. And it's really something that I'm taking at at face value, at my initial impressions. I haven't looked at a bunch of the other reviews that I've seen online or anything like that. So this is my genuine gut reaction to these things, which I hope is more useful than me just parroting back things that the other folks have said. So in general, the book looks good, right? Big surprise that the new models have good rules, right? But as a whole, the army looks like it's durable and punchy, right? It has some good weaponry. It has some really solid profiles in it. But it seems obvious that a unit of smaller individuals might have some difficulty with movement and might have some difficulty with positioning, especially in the hands of someone that's not used to playing an army with that particular set of strengths and limitations. So right off the bat here, I think positioning is going to be one of the more challenging elements of this army. But between the special rules, the profiles, and the buffs, they can put out a ton of damage. It's just that relatively limited range on the majority of the weapon profiles and the standard 5-inch movement penalizes foot slogging armies. So you really do have to find ways around just taking the guys you want and getting them to the places that they need to be. And for that reason, I think the army is largely shooting focused, right? But there are some melee elements of it, particularly if we look at some of the elite choices. Well, actually, both of the elite choices have really reasonable melee capabilities, and several of the HQ units also have some pretty beefy melee profiles, especially when we start looking at relics and stuff like that. So there's definitely ways that you can build this to have some melee component, or even really focus on the melee aspect of the army. But shooting seems to be like the more comfortable way to build a list here. The core units, which is basically everything, are competitively priced, but the characters are pretty expensive. Not in terms of what they do. They do a lot, and so I think the price is worth it. They are appropriately costed, but they are expensive, right? And so there's no 40-point character in this codex. They're all pulling about a hundo in terms of their basic stat line. So you're going to be paying a lot for those characters. You're going to be paying a lot for the things that really make the codex work. So that's going to be your HQ units and your vehicles. Vehicles, for multiple reasons, are seemingly pretty important in this codex, and you're going to be paying points for them. They're going to soak up a lot of your army list, for better or worse. But it's not like you don't get a lot of value for that. All right, so let's start by looking at the army-wide special rules, and they have a fair number of them, largely because they affect the way their weapons work. They have a bunch of special rules about the different types of weapons that they have, because their weapons are supposed to be so, unique compared to the rest of the 41st millennium. So, so there's a few different things that affect how weapons work here, and that's important because it pops up all over the place in the codex. So they have hunter weapons, and like most of their weapons are these hunter weapons, which is just a weapon type, just like assault or heavy or rapid fire. They just have hunter weapons instead of those. And this unit profile, or this weapon profile, basically just means that they can ignore all the rules that affect other types of weapons, right? So they get around the things that either boost or restrict assault weapons. So that means that they don't get the benefit of assault weapons when you advance, but they also don't get the penalty of heavy weapons when you move. So they, it's a double-edged sword in that way, but, really just means that you're getting the number of shots most of the time as long as you're just walking around. So that's useful. There's not really any place where this comes into play. It's not like there's a bunch of stratagems that say, when you fire a hunter weapon, X happens or anything like that. It's just kind of a way of setting these weapons aside from the rest of the rules. They also have this mechanic called Eye of the Ancestors, and this is really the core thing that comes into play both at a very direct level, but also triggers a bunch of different abilities. So every one of the leagues keys off of this in some way, and there's also a bunch of weapons that are better when you are benefiting from this mechanic of Eye of the Ancestors. So the way that this works is that judgment tokens get put on units that either kill a Votann unit, control an objective, or perform actions. And there's restrictions on how many of those you can put on and the cases. But in general, when your opponent does something, you often get to put a judgment token on them because you're mad at them that they did the thing. And so those judgment tokens are pretty powerful in the way that they allow you to auto hit and wound on a 6-up, 5-up, or 4-up if you have 1, 2, or 3 tokens respectively. And so accumulating these tokens quickly, especially in your priority targets, is extremely useful. It synergizes with effects that trigger off of a 6 to wound. For example, Magna Rail rifles, which we'll talk about in a second. If you get a 6 to wound, you get some pretty big dividends for doing that. And so that's much easier with judgment tokens because now you are effectively getting a 6 to wound just by rolling a 4-up to hit. So that's super useful, especially given these more intricate weapon profiles that we have. It's also super useful against elites and monsters, given how Votann weaponry is built. A lot of their weaponry isn't going to have a problem dealing with lighter infantry models and that sort of thing. They'll chew through that, no problem. Having this judgment on tougher units, though, is really going to pare them down. It's going to make them a lot more easily removed. And so that's one of the places that you're really going to want to see those in the absence of some of these synergies like the Magna Rail and stuff like that. And this raises a really interesting dynamic where opponents are going to want to mitigate the amount of judgment that is on their army and spread it out, because obviously having a 4-up proc on this mechanic is a lot more detrimental to your opponent than having a 6-up proc. They'll want to have, one judgment token on multiple units as opposed to having all the judgment tokens on one. Or conversely, they'll want to just keep stacking judgment on one unit. If it already has 3, you can't get 4. So you might as well just keep going with it and do your best to try to keep that unit on the board. So there's kind of two ways to do it. You either want to spread out the judgment tokens as much as you can, or just consolidate them down as much as possible. You don't want to end up in a place where you have a bunch of units with 2 or 3 tokens on your army. And so that raises a whole bunch of problems, a whole bunch of mental 4D chess for your opponent. And that's a massive that's such a massive tactical advantage to you, not even thinking about the math hammer or how this affects the performance of your army, just messing with your opponent, saying, whatever you do, I'm going to get an advantage from it. That's really powerful, just in terms of like the art of war or whatever. So a really cool and potentially powerful mechanic that really is at the core of how this army works. Another one of their special rule is the Magna Rail. And this is a version of the rail rifle technology we see in the Tau Codex. It has, kind of a similar feel to how it works. It always ignores invulnerable save. not just on like a rail cannon or anything like that. It's just every rail weapon ignores invulnerable saves, which is super good, obviously. And then on a 6 to wound, including, when you get a judgment proc on it, which again can happen on a 4 up to hit, the damage spills over. So some of these really heavy magnet rail weapons can do, 10 or more damage. And that can just rip through an entire unit, right? So you can have an entire unit just wiped out by a magnet rail weapon if you line it up right. And so that's extremely powerful and very scary. And I think that's going to be a really attractive element of this army list right at the get-go. There's a few places that you can get it. Like, for example, you can get really big ones with the land fortress. You can get smaller ones with your troop units, your Hearthkin units. And so there's a few places that you can get it. It's not ubiquitous, certainly, but you have ways that you can get it, and it's going to be in an army list, most likely. And then there are a few more special rules. Steady Advance is the first of these, and Steady Advance, as well as Void Armor, which is the next one we'll talk about, and Eye of the Ancestors are ubiquitous in the Codex. So every data slate has these. And it allows Votann models to ignore movement modifiers. So sorry if you're trying to trip them up, it's not going to happen. And when they advance, they always advance 3 inches. If they have the accelerated keyword, that's switched to 6 inches. So that's basically the bikes and vehicles are accelerated, which is, makes sense. And this rule is like good, right? Because the Votann models, at least as infantry, don't have very good movement. And so, not paring them down even more makes sense from kind of a balance perspective, I suppose. But that's, really powerful for some of these tricks that would otherwise kind of try to keep the Votann at bay, right? Like, one of the big weaknesses of the list is going to be its maneuverability and range. And so movement modifiers are even that much more detrimental to the functioning of the list. This rule allows them to ignore that, which is really strong. It really alleviates that potential weakness. And I can't help but think about how Necrons would really benefit from kind of this army-wide rule, because if you get Necrons to trip up and slow down, that's a sad day for the Necrons. They also have Void Armor. Again, this is a ubiquitous special rule. It means that they have -1 to AP against shots against them, so it's essentially Armor of Contempt in this way, but wounds and damage against them also cannot be re-rolled. So it's super Armor of Contempt. You can't re-roll wounds. You can't re-roll damage. Whatever you get, that's what you get. You get no more. Right? They're very they're very stingy with their rerolls. They will not let you reroll against them, which is, again, very good, because the ability to reroll and recoup failed wounds, get better damage is massively beneficial from a math hammer perspective. And so being able to totally avoid that is good. It's also it's just a good durability boost, especially against mid-power weapons, right? We have this -1 AP. And so if you're, AP -1, AP -2, that's taking a big chunk out of your potential damage dealing. And so Void Armor is pretty rough against those mid-power weapons. You almost want to either shift entirely to Volume of Fire, so like AP 0, or you have to really go into AP -3, AP -4 to get the desired result. And so this can completely negate some staple army mechanics and some stratagems, right? There are some things that, there are certain lists that just rely on -1, -2 AP, rely on rerolling wounds, rerolling damage. And so Void Armor just says, no, you can't do any of those things. Have a good game. And then the last special rule is for beam weapons. And beam weapons is a special rule that weapons can have, right? So there are hunter weapons that have the beam special rule. And it makes additional wounds against intervening units if they're also targetable, right? So it's basically like you're firing a laser, and if that laser were to hit multiple units, assuming you could otherwise target them, you get hits against those units too. And so this is super position dependent. There's a piece of war gear that the Tau have that works very similar to this. That's just not worth it because of how position dependent it is and how short range it is. I think that applies too for a lot of the beam weapons in this codex, but there are some longer range beam weapons where this is going to be fairly useful. You're going to be able to actually make this work using some of those longer range ones, I think. And so that's cool. Then they have pew pew laser beams that hit multiple units and sometimes do a lot of damage. And so there's several viable mechanized options for positioning these that can make this really devastating using some of those shorter mid-range options. But there's also two units in particular that have longer range beam options that we can use to really just penalize armies that are clumped up or are trying to utilize characters in a really concentrated way. All right, so let's dive into the meat and potatoes of the codex, the units, right? That's the thing that you really want to know about. And so let's start with the only troops choice in the whole codex, Hearthkin Warriors. Now, because these guys are your only troops choice, you're almost guaranteed to take them, and they're spicy little meatballs. They're pretty good for what you pay, and they have a ton of options. So for 11 points, you get a model with a 5-inch movement, 3-up weapon skill, 3-up ballistic skill, strength 4, toughness 4, 1 wound, 2 attacks, 7 leadership, with a 4-up save. And so that's pretty reasonable, right? Like, considering they're basically a mix between Space Marines and Tau, they have kind of, a profile that reflects that, right? And this profile, by the way, is basically the starting point for every other unit in the Codex. Most of these characteristics are going to be the same or similar in all of the infantry in the book. So, what we talk about here kind of goes for most of the Codex. And so the major limitations here are the movement being 5, but that is alleviated somewhat by the steady advance special rule, right? So that allows them to ignore the reductions to movement and also always advance 3. So you could advance them to 8 inches as opposed to having to roll. So that's good, right? There's some standard predictability in their movement there, which is good. But again, if you would do that, they don't have assault weapons. They have hunter weapons. So you can't fire those hunter weapons and advance at the same time. The other big thing is having a save of 4-up. You would kind of think that Space Dwarves would have a better save than this, but it's okay because they have Void Armor, right? The Void Armor makes that 4-up save actually go pretty darn far, and they have some war gear options that will make that go even further. So that is, really a pretty resilient profile, just as it is. They have core, which basically everything in Codex has core, so that's not necessarily notable for these guys in particular, but it does mean that we have to consider how each of these units is playing in a context with other characters, with the buffs that they might get. So, right, keep that in mind. That it's not just that they have ballistic skill 3 up, it's that they have the ballistic skill 3 up and then can also get rerolling 1s from a call, right? So all those things stack up to make Hearthkin Warriors, and by extension all other infantry in the book, pretty substantial. They have 2 different primary weapon choices. The standard is the Autok Powder and Bolter, which is 24-inch range, Hunter 2, Strength 4, -1 AP, 1 damage. And that's, reliable output. You always get those 2 shots at 24-inch range, again, unless you advance. And that's just good, right? That's a pretty reliable amount of damage. That's just kind of a standard thing. You can upgrade them, though, for 1 point to have Ion Blasters. And this is something that just kind of as a Tau player, makes my mouth water. So for +1 point, so they're 12 points now instead of just 11, you get an 18-inch range, Hunter 1, Strength 5, -2 AP, 2 damage shot, which is just a really good profile, right? So this does, a decent amount of damage on a standard troop, and you're fielding these guys in units of 10 to 20. So that's 10 to 20 of these shots on your basic troop choice, which is just oppressive, really. I think that's just a really compelling profile that makes me really interested in just Hearthkin warriors. Now, it's only 18 inches, right? And these guys are slow, so deploying that weapon is a challenge, right? So you really do need to think more about this being a mechanized list. If you're going to be taking ion blasters, you're not going to be as able to deploy that weapon without transport. So the transport question here really becomes much more urgent if you take ion blasters. But if you do, I feel like there's a mechanized list that works really well just by taking that ion blaster with a transport. You have a lot of additional options though on these guys too. Like I said, there's tons of options in this list, which is cool. It kind of reminds me of TAC Marines in this way. You just have tons of options. So you get your choice of a couple or a few different support equipments. So you can take a med pack, you can take a comms array, you can take a scanner, and all those do different things directly, but they also have war gear stratagems that are pretty darn powerful, and we'll get to those in a little bit. But all of those seem worthwhile. Like the med pack allows you to ignore the first failed save in a turn. You can use the comms array to always count within range of a call's basic reroll one's ability, and then you can use a scanner to always ignore light cover, which all those are really good, and especially if you're, all those are good, right? All those are good. They all seem worth it. There are some exceptions where I think, depending on the characters you take and how you're building your army, there might be some redundancy in those, so you might not want to opt for those. Or of course, if you're going for a budget build, you might not want those as well. If you're kind of going for a bare bones thing and you really are interested in some of the different units that you really want to spend more points on, then you might be cutting points here. But I think those support war gear options are just good, right? Like they're the type of thing that I'd want to have that on my basic trooper. And then you also have a suite of different special weapons, and you can take one of each of these for every 10. You can take an auto rifle or a missile launcher or a beamer or a Magna rail rifle. And, I think the auto rifle and the beamer are a little less interesting. The Magna rail rifle is really tempting. It's 24-inch range, strength 9, -4 AP, D3 +3 damage, so an average of 5, and then it has the Magna Rail ability. So if you are wounding on a 6, that damage ripples through the unit, which, again, if you have 3 judgment tokens on, that means that if you roll a 4 or higher to hit, that ability triggers, and so it's going to be really easy to get that Magna Rail to proc using judgment tokens. And so that's really cool and really powerful, but it costs 20 points. And I'm not sure that you really want to spend 20 additional points for a special weapon in your basic troop unit. Now, that said, if we compare the damage output of a Magna Rail rifle to just a standard warrior here, it probably is pretty favorable. So, it's, in terms of efficiency, it's probably there. In terms of absolute investment, maybe it's not. But the Magna Rail is tempting, but it is costly. Otherwise, the missile launcher seems like a pretty reasonable choice, given that it has a good range. It's 30-inch range. And then you have different profiles on it. You can either go for, the focused shot, or you can go for the blast shot. So Hunter 1 or Hunter D6, that's strength 9 or strength 5. Or -2 AP or -1 AP, or D6 damage if you're going for the focus shot, or just 1 damage if you're going for the blast shot. So I think that's a flexible option there that's worth considering, given that it's not going to cost you 20 points. So but overall, I think these are really strong troop choice, and if depending on how you build the rest of your army, particularly with your attention to characters, your attention to vehicles, you might have a sizable investment in kin on their own, just because they seem like they probably have a good amount of efficiency, both offensively, but especially defensively. These guys are going to stay on the table if you support them correctly, which is, the name of the game, right? The name of the game is be here, do the thing, hold the objective. It's much less about necessarily killing power, and these guys are going to be able to be there and do the things. So I think these are really cool troop choices and a really nice kind of niche. Don't tell me it's niche. It can be either one. Really nice niche or niche for this particular codex. Moving on to the elites, looking at Chthonian Berserkers and Einir Hearthguard. The Berserkers are 22 points per model, and for that you get a model with 5-inch movement, 3 up ballistic skill, weapon skill, 5 strength and toughness, 2 wounds, 3 attacks, 8 leadership, and a 6 up save. They're all the same. There's no like sergeant or anything like that. And they kind of fit the melee archetype, right? They have some pretty good damage output in melee. They're not super durable. They only have that 6 up save and 2 wounds, but they have a couple things going for them. One is that they have this augmented special rule, which basically gives them a 5 up feel no pain that gets boosted by 1 if it's a 1 damage attack. So basically becoming a 4 up feel no pain against 1 damage attacks. And then they also get to re-roll their charge roll. So those are 2 pretty important things to consider, right? Like that makes them actually somewhat functional. You can get a little bit more durability if you pair them with Uther the Destined, which is a special character we'll get to in a little bit here. But he has an aura that can improve or give units a invulnerable save. So you can get a little bit more durability in them that way as well if you position things correctly. So they do hit hard, right? They have 3 attacks with good strength, ranging from 5 to 10, depending on how you equip them, with reasonably high AP, generally like -3 AP. So that's pretty good. The plasma axes are their standard weapon. You have 2 different profiles that you can pick with them, either strength user or strength +1. Again, they're both -3 AP, and then either doing 1 or 2 damage. And then if you do the sweep, you actually get double the amount of hits instead of just 1. So like that's a pretty generalist option. You're going to be getting a fair amount of mileage out of that. However, you can upgrade them to concussive gauntlets, which double their concussive mauls, which double their strength, and then are -3 AP, 3 damage, but you have to subtract 1 to their hit. So they're hitting on 4s instead of 3s. But strength 10, -3, 3 damage, not too shabby, right? Like that's a pretty good output. So that could be really good for, taking out elite units, taking out characters, taking out vehicles or knights or whatever, right? Like you can do a lot with that. But in any of these circumstances, you probably are going to want to put them in a transport, right? Because, this is a unit where you really don't miss out on advancing, right? With hunter weapons, you don't really, you don't really care because they're melee. They have 1 shooting option, which is their grenade launcher, and that's fine for like some plink damage, but really is useful in terms of its stratagem, which allows you to affect the movement abilities of other units. So aside from that, you're not shooting anything, and so you could use the steady advance special roll all you want, right? You can move your 8 inches every turn to get a little bit further up the board, but then you're more vulnerable to shooting again. So really, you want them in a transport. The other elites option is the Einir Hearthguard. These guys are 35 points per model, and the standard Hearthguard has movement 5, 3 up weapon and ballistic skill, 5 strength and toughness, 2 wounds, 2 attacks, leadership 8, and a 2 up save. So they are one of the chonkier boys in the Codex. And they are kind of a jack of all trades unit. And what I mean by that is they have a little bit of everything. They have some reasonable durability. They have some shooting. They have some melee. They have some anti-horde capabilities. They have some anti-elite capabilities. They're just kind of all over the place. They feel very much like a Tyranid warrior or a crisis suit in that way, that they are kind of there to be an anchor unit in a lot of ways. And so they have 3 different weapons. One of them is a melee weapon, another is an anti-infantry weapon, and another is an anti-elite weapon, shooting weapon, that is. So you can see what I mean here is that they have a toolkit at their disposal. And so they seem like they are really well positioned to do a lot of damage however you want to use them. They have a sergeant called a Hessier, or I think I'm saying that right, a Hessier. And he has a piece of war gear that gives him an invulnerable save, which is nice for tanking. You can also use a stratagem to give him some relics, which can make him a little bit more of a beat stick kind of character. But you can give up that Wave Field Crest is the thing that gives him an additional wound and a 4-up invulnerable save. You can give that up to give him a teleport homer, basically. So that can make the unit teleport or deep strike in, which is pretty useful. And I think, unless you're taking a land fortress, or even if you are taking a land fortress, you'll probably have at least one of these units that's going to be deep striking in order to do some, positioning, right? Because again, aside from the vehicles here, and I guess the Pioneers, which are the bikers, the Codex as a whole isn't going to be, the foot troops aren't going to be able to do the positioning, right? So you need to find ways around that. This is one of those ways. You can use transports, you can use Pioneers, you can use teleport homers, just like this. So that is a tool that you probably are going to want to use, at least in some cases. There's a bunch of different stratagems that can buff these guys and make them hit really hard, whether in shooting or in close combat. And so they seem like they really can be a centerpiece of the army, or one of your harder hitting elements that you really are applying in a very tactical way. Moving on to the fast attack options, looking at the Sagittar and the Hurricane Pioneers. The Sagittar, I think, is one of the best choices in the Codex. I'm in my head, it just seems like a really strong option. And that's for a few reasons. One is that it is a pretty decent light tank, but it also provides some of that critical transport capability for your army. So it's pulling double duty at a really reasonable price. It's not just a transport, it's not just a light tank, it's both of those things. You're getting a good amount of firepower on it, and you're getting to move your guys around in a way that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. So I think just from a tactical perspective, this really fills a need in the army, and I'm excited about it. Plus, it's just, I love the model. I don't know why, I just do. I think it's cool looking. That probably helps. Maybe it makes me biased. I don't know. But so for 110 points, it has movement 12, a 6-up weapon skill, big surprise, Ballistic skill 3, strength 6, toughness 7, 9 wounds, 3 attacks, 8 leadership, and a 3-up save. So a pretty standard light tank transport profile. It's certainly more in the realm of a Falcon than it is a Rhino, but that's, I think, a pretty reasonable profile. And it has the accelerated keyword too, which, because it's a transport, is going to be useful, right? So it has that 12-inch movement, and then when it advances, it'll advance 6. Not bad, right? So you're getting your 18-inch movement there. That's pretty darn good. It can hold up to 5 infantry models, but it can't transport exo armor or exo frame models. So that excludes your Einir, and then also your Thunderkin can't go in there at all. So it's really just your Berserkers, most of your characters, and your Hearthkin. Those are the ones that are going to be able to actually get in here. So that's good, right? It's really meant for these smaller units, which makes sense. It has a special rule, though, that I think is really clutch. And that special rule is that it can split Hearthkin and Berserker units. Those come at a minimum of 10 models per unit. But if you take these Sagittars, which can come into a unit of 2, if you take 2 Sagittars, you can split a unit of Hearthkin or Berserkers into 2 smaller units, which is super powerful. Right now you have double the number of units, double the amount of board control that you had otherwise. Super powerful ability. And The only downside is that you have to choose where your unique models go. Where does your Thayan for your Hearthkin go? Where does your Rail Rifle, if you want to go that route, where does that go, right? You don't get double of those things. You don't get double med packs, for example. So you have to be selective in how you do that. But nonetheless, that's pretty darn powerful. And it provides critical maneuverability for your army, especially for those Berserkers or those Ion, Blaster, Hearthkin, right? You're going to want these things. They are very valuable just in that regard. They don't have room, though, for both the infantry models that you're splitting, for example, and characters, right? So you can't put a Call and your 5 Hearthkin in there. You have to figure out something different for the Call, right? He can teleport in or something like that. But there's no room for characters and infantry in one nice little bundle. You would either have to figure something else out for them or bring an additional Sagittar to put your characters in, something like that. So that is an additional downside. But overall, I think their transport capacity is clutch. And on top of that, they're pretty dang punchy themselves. They're spicy little fish. I don't know where that came from. Whatever. Let's just go with it, okay? They're punchy. So their basic weapon is a beam cannon. So that, again, is going to add additional hits to intervening models. And it's range 24 inches. So you're much more likely to be able to actually get those extra hits between the range here and the maneuverability of having a vehicle, right? So this is becoming much more feasible here compared to a short range ground infantry based beam weapon. You're having a lot more flexibility here. You're probably going to be able to use that sometimes, right? Heavy 2, strength 9, -3 AP, D6 damage, right? So that's a punch, right? 2 of those shots, strength 9, -3 AP, D6 damage. You could potentially be getting multiple units with a single one of those shots. That could add up. It also has a twin bolt cannon, which is range 36 inches, Hunter 6, strength 6, -2 AP, 2 damage. And that's just that's a nice profile, right? Like that's the heavy burst cannon type of profile on the Riptide that we just love. You have 6 of those shots. You really can't complain too much about that being the secondary weapon on a transport. That's good. That's just good. And you can switch out the beam cannon for a missile launcher, which is fine. You can take an auto cannon, so range 24, heavy 6, strength 7, -2 AP, 2 damage. Or you can take a missile launcher, which is heavy 2, strength 10, -3 AP, 3 damage. I think the beam cannon's pretty good the way it is. I don't think there's necessarily huge need to pivot away from that. The auto cannon is tempting, right? Especially given the volume of fire on the bolt cannon. I think that's probably the alternative that I would go towards is if I'm not taking the beam cannon, I'm going to be taking that auto cannon for 12 shots on this sucker. And just, really offering some really strong support for my 5 dudes that I'm carrying around. So I think this is a really awesome model, and really something that is going to be a staple of these lists, just for multiple reasons. It seems like it's just a really strong pick for 110 points. The other fast attack option is the Hearthkin Pioneers, and these guys are pretty decent scout bikers, right? They have a few things going for them. Volume of fire, massive output is not one of them for the most part, but they do have some clear applications in very targeted senses. So I think they have a role that's fairly well defined in the Codex. A lot of that has to do with the fact about how fast they are and some of the tricks that they can do with movement, which is pretty unique in the Codex. So for 30 points, you get a model with movement 12, weapon skill 3 up, ballistic skill 3 up, strength 4, toughness 5, 3 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 8, and a 4 up save. So they have some bulk to them, not a ton. So they are fairly easily removed. But again, keep in mind they have void armor. So that is going to make them last on the table longer than you would think just looking at the profile. They have several different weapons, right? They have a bolt revolver, a bolt shotgun, and some concussive grenades. For the most part, you're not going to be using those, outside of, basically close combat or really close quarters environments. Most of their shooting is going to be from their Magnet Coil autocannon, which is range 24, Hunter 3, strength 7, -1 AP, and 2 damage. So that's a fair amount of volume of fire per model, right? 3 shots, strength 7, not bad. 2 damage, great. But being -1 AP, they're going to be hurt by Armor of Contempt, of course, which is fairly common. Plus, they're going to be hurt by other Void Armor now, too. So, that -1 AP is of variable value, of course. So, yeah, like that's okay, right? That's fine. They have this thing where 1 in 3 of them, because they come in units of 3 to 6, 1 in 3 can take a upgraded weapon. So you could take an ion beamer or a rotary cannon. I think the I think the rotary cannon is probably a nice selection here, because the ion beamer has only range 18. Again, their speed allows you to potentially deploy that reasonably well, but the rotary cannon is Hunter 9, strength 6, -2 AP, 1 damage, and that I just think that volume of fire is probably pretty good, especially given that they have a set of war gear. So you can get a Searchlight, which removes dense cover benefits. You can take a Spectral Scanner, which removes light cover benefits. And you can take a Comms Array, which allows them to benefit from the Call's reroll or from 24 inches away. So all those things kind of suggest that, yeah, these guys are going to want to be moving up the board. And there's 2 different ways that they can do that. One is through a pregame move, which is one of the really one of the few deployment tricks that you have in the Codex, one of the few options you have for early board control. So having your Pioneers move up and do some shenanigans early game is potentially a really useful thing, of course. But they also seem like they have a really good application for hunting down the few guys that are on objective behind a ruin or something like that, right? Like they're going to ignore the cover, they're going to be able to put out a fair amount of shots and clear the last few stragglers off of that objective. And so that seems like that's really where they're going to shine, is running interference, right? Whether that's through early game movement or by hunting down objectives. They also have a stratagem that we'll get to later that allows them to redeploy or move off the board and go in reserves, which is pretty darn cool and pretty useful too. So just more ways you can really bring the Pioneers to mess with your opponent in an army that they're otherwise going to be looking at as fairly predictable in terms of its deployment and movement, right? These guys are going to be the wild card. And so I think, yeah, they're cool. 30 points for their offensive capabilities maybe isn't as awesome, but given where they are in the Codex, I think that's pretty darn good. Right, and so we have 2 fast attack options here. None of the force organization chart slots here are particularly overly populated, right? There's not a ton of units in the Codex, but this is one of the places where it feels most acute in that there is no dedicated transport, right? The Sagittar is as close as we get to that in the Codex, and it seems like they intentionally made it not a dedicated transport for 2 reasons. One is because it has some beefy abilities to it that probably aren't necessarily appropriate for just being a dedicated transport. But 2, there's no other competition with Pioneers in the fast attack slot. And so by keeping it a fast attack and not a dedicated transport, they're forcing some level of choice or some competition. And so, if you're in a place where you want to bring 4 Sagittars, for example, that's going to eat up 2 of your fast attack slots and leave you with only 1 for Pioneers, which maybe that's all you need, but nonetheless, there's a little bit of pull here, more so, I think, than other portions of the army, I think. I think this is probably one of the more contentious places, aside from HQ. All right, so let's look at the heavy support options. Hecaton Land Fortress and Brokir Thunderkin. You gotta love the names, right? So the Land Fortress is just that. It is a fortress. It's not a land raider. It's not a land train. It is a land fortress because you can put a bunch of dudes in it. It is pretty darn tough, and it has a bunch of guns on it. So yeah, that sounds like a fortress to me. For 230 points base, you get a model with movement 10, weapon skill 6, ballistic skill 3, strength and toughness 8, 16 wounds, 6 attacks, 9 leadership, and a 2-up save. So it's a little beefcake. And it has a bunch of guns, like I said. So it has the cyclic ion cannon as its base primary weapon. That is a 24-inch range, heavy 3d3, strength 8, -2, 2 damage blast weapon. It has an Mater auto cannon, which is 24 inches, heavy 6, strength 7, -2 AP, 2 damage. And then 4 bolt cannons, each of which is a 36-inch range, Hunter 2, strength 6, -2, and 2 damage weapon. So tons of shots in there. And then it has a spectral scanner, which allows it to ignore light cover. Just a good set of war gear there. Your ion cannon as your primary weapon is decent, right? But the range being only 24 inches and being blast or liabilities, because you have a transport capability here, which I guess I should tell you is 12 infantry models, but you can put exo armor units in here, so like Hearthguard, and you can also put exo or exile frame armor in here as well. So that means you can put 6 Hearthguard or 4 Thunderkin in here instead of the 12 infantry, or some combination of those things. And so you got your dudes in here. They're probably going to want to go somewhere, and that means that they're probably going to end up closer to the enemy than farther away. And so, you know, the range can be, you know, not necessarily as big of a deal because you're getting closer, but then it's a blast, so you can't fire it if you're in close combat. So there is a give and take there. I think it's a pretty good weapon just as it is, but of course, there are alternatives. So the biggest alternative, the one that has me all sorts of excited, is the heavy Magna Rail Cannon, which, yeah, you know, just the name should get you excited, right? So it's 36 inches, heavy 1, as rail cannons should be, strength 14, -4 AP, 2d3 plus 6 damage. And then, of course, it has the Magna Rail special rule, which, again, if we have judgment tokens, will just rip through an entire unit. So that's a strength 14, -4 AP, 2d3, right? So that's 4 damage plus 6, so 10 damage on average, that will just basically work as mortal wounds. It'll just rip through an army, or rip through a unit with a single shot. That is massive, right? So that's going to work well against vehicles, it's going to work well against monsters, it's going to work well against anything between those and the lowliest guardsmen, right? It's going to rip through all of those things. And that's just really good. And you can make sure that happens with buffs from your con, with shenanigans on judgment tokens. You can guarantee that this thing is going to just delete a unit. And that is really powerful. Then there's the beamer. Like, I'm excited about beam weapons. I'm more excited about rail weapons. I feel that's how I feel about Tau, though, too, right? So the beam weapon, heavy, or not heavy, Hunter 2, strength 8, -3 AP, 4 damage. You get double hits if it's more than 15 inches away, which is cool. And yeah, like, that's cool. It's not as cool as the rail gun, though, I don't think. Especially because it's position dependent, just like every other beam weapon, right? So you really have to be in the right place at the right time and have your opponent line up in the right, just all these things have to literally line up for you. Railgun don't care. Railgun's just going to have a time. So, yeah, I think the railgun is really attractive here. And this unit as a whole, you're going to have, I'm going to be surprised if you're not going to see at least one of these in every list, if not more. They just seem really attractive. And 230 points is, you know, a chunk of points, but probably worth it. Given the fact that it can move your dudes, you know, it can move a full unit of Hearthkin, It's the only thing that can do that. And it can take it can take your elite and heavy support infantry as well, which this is the only option for them. So that's pretty darn good too. So you're going to see these. They're going to do a nice chunk of damage and provide really tactical support to those units that desperately need movement beyond their base profile. So it just seems like almost an auto-include. I wouldn't be surprised if this gets a major nerf in terms of points sometime in the near future, but yeah, or something else, right? Like the way Games Workshop has been dealing with nerfs has been somewhat unpredictable in terms of how they actually do that, whether it's points or changes to the rules or whatever. So, but yeah, this model looks cool and is cool. Right. And then there's the Thunderkin, the Brokir Thunderkin. And for 35 points, you get a model with movement 5, weapon skill, ballistic skill 3, strength 5, toughness 5, 3 wounds, 2 attacks, leadership 8. There is no sergeant, so they're all the same. Yeah, you know the drill at this point, right? That's they're the guys. I guess I should say they have a 3-up save. So they're one of the few 3-up save, right? We have some 4-up, we have a couple 3-ups, we have limited number of 2-up saves. They're the 3-up ones, I guess. So, they're your devastators or your broadsides or whatever of the army. You take them in units of 3 to 6, and their standard weapon is a bolt cannon. So that's a 36-inch range, Hunter 3, Strength 6, minus 2 AP, 2 damage weapon. That's a pretty good balance of quality and volume, right? So we know that Strength 6 minus 2 AP, 2 damage profile, that's reliable, that's good. 36-inch range, that's nice too. That means that they don't have to really worry too much about moving necessarily. And then, or at least in some cases, don't have to, right? And there's 9 of those shots in a 3-man unit. So that's good, right? You can switch them out though for a blast cannon, which is 18-inch range, Hunter D6, Strength 5, minus 3 AP, 2 damage blast, which gets upgraded to 3 damage against units that have a save of 3 or better, which is a cool mechanic, right? Like it does better against the heavier units. I guess that's why it's a graviton blast cannon. So that's cool, right? Like that seems like it could be really impactful, but it's only 18-inch ranges. So that's kind of an awkward profile, right? The short range and low strength in particular is kind of weird on that, right? Like there's not a lot of super elite units where the minus 3 AP is going to be useful, that you're actually going to get the full benefit of blast out of, and the 18-inch range means that you have to really get close. So it's just kind of awkward in my mind. The range and the strength are kind of don't fit with the rest of the profile, I suppose. Or rather, maybe it's the blast that doesn't fit. I don't know. But yeah, I guess it's the blast that doesn't fit the most part. I don't know. One of those two ain't right in my mind. So that's probably not high on my priority list, is taking the Graviton blast cannon. The SP conversion beamer though, that's cool. That's 30-inch range, Hunter 1, Strength 7, minus 2 AP, 3 damage. You get 2 hits if a target's more than 15 inches away. So that's true for both your primary target and anything that intervenes. So of course, like all beam weapons, this is terrain and position dependent, but given its range, right, you really could plop these guys down in a spot, that has a nice lane of fire and just have them go to town and hopefully pick up a couple of those beam procs. It's not guaranteed, right? Your opponent is going to have to be careful about their positioning stuff. They could totally mitigate that. But you have an opportunity here with them, whereas a lot of other beam weapons, you don't have that opportunity because of the range. So I think that's cool. I think that's interesting. I would lean probably towards that if I'm going to take them. Take the beamer, put them in the backfield or something, not worry too much about them having to move around the board. There's a stratagem that you can use to allow them to shoot and perform actions. So yeah, it just seems like they have some good backfield play with the beamer or the bolt cannon too, because of the range. You could go that way as well. The blast cannon seems like a much more aggressive type of limited application approach, so it's less interesting to me because of that. But I think this is where they are. I think they're your backline, especially at the 35 point price point. I think that's where they're at, right? Because for a unit of 3 of them, that's 100 points, right? So a little bit more than 100 points. But yeah, I think both of these are good choices. But the Land Fortress, man, you can't complain about you can complain about the Land Fortress, but should you? I don't know. And then finally, we get to the HQ units, right? We talked about what all the different, kind of cogs in the machine are. Let's get to who's controlling that machine. So we're going to start off with Uther the Destined and the Calls. The Calls are the, kind of base level commander for your league. And Uther is the only special character in the book. He is a special character call. So yeah, we'll start there, right? So Uther is a massive force multiplier and just a beat stick character. He's locked to the Greater Thurian League, but I don't think that's an issue, considering that the Greater Thurian League is one of the best, if not the best league, in my opinion. So, I don't think that's really a problem. If you're going with a different league, there are ways to do many of the same things. Not all of them, but many of the same things you can do with the standard calls, and we'll get to that in a minute. So Uther for 140 points is movement 5, weapon skill ballistic skill 2, strength and toughness 5, 6 wounds, 5 attacks, leadership 9, 3 up save. And one of the biggest things that Uther and the calls do is add judgment tokens, right? So there are kind of passive ways that you or / your opponent get judgment tokens generated, but the calls just like point at a unit and be like, hey, no, you have judgment now too. So he can add 1 judgment token or 2 if he has a warlord trait, which by the way, he actually gets 2 warlord traits. So that's cool. One of those warlord traits allows him to add an additional judgment token, and the other extends the range of his aura ability. So, those are definitely things that are meaningful additions to how he functions. But so yeah, he can add 1 or 2 judgment tokens to a unit visible to him, which is really excellent. So that's a really predictable way, one of the few ways that you can control exactly what happens with judgment, and it happens in the command phase, so it's going to be able to be used by you throughout the rest of your turn, right? Which it's not a reactive thing. You have agency in this. You prescribe when and how this happens, which is good. He also has a couple powerful offensive buffs. So he has the Kindred Hero aura, which allows units within 6 inches of him to reroll hit rolls of 1. But if you have a comms relay, is available on Pioneers or on Hearthkin, you can get that benefit within 24 inches. Massive. That's why I say the comms relay seems like a pretty good investment, pretty good thing to take. He also has the ability to pick a unit and give them full rerolls to hit within 6 inches. And again, these types of abilities have extended ranges because of his warlord trait. He also has a defensive buff that he can give to infantry and bikes within 6 inches. He can give them a 5 up invulnerable save. I mentioned this when we were talking about the berserkers. I think that that's one way that you could get more durability in your berserkers is by having him nearby. But really, there's not a unit you're not going to want this on, right? Whether it's Hearthkin or Einir or berserkers or your pioneers or Thunderkin, right? Or your characters, you're going to want a 5++ on all of those. So yeah, take it. It's going to be great. right? So that's something that's unique to him, right? Is this defensive buff, and it's just good, right? He also has an ability that allows you to select a hit, wound, damage, or saving throw roll for a friendly unit within 6 inches, including himself, and force it to be a 6. So that is cool. And it counts as an unmodified 6. And let's start doing the math here, right? So if you can force something to be unmodified 6, let's say a hit roll or a wound roll, that means there's tons of things that you can actually proc, tons of weapons that you can actually proc using this ability, including the Magna Rail ability or disintegrator weapons. Both of those have things that proc on 6s, and so he can make that happen, which is really cool. Think about this guy next to a land fortress. He can, give a single judgment or 2 judgment, whatever, it doesn't matter in this case. He can give a judgment token to a unit, have the land fortress shoot at it, force that hit to be a 6, and if it has 1 judgment token, if it hits on a 6, that counts as automatically wounding on a 6, and guess what you get if you automatically wound on a 6? You get the Magna Rail effect, so it's just going to rip through whatever you point at. So, yeah, him and a land fortress just seems like a really good combo. So, maybe this is something that you're going to see adjusted in an FAQ or something, but maybe not. He's also just sturdy and beefy on his own right, in his own right. So he has a special rule that damage against him is reduced to 1. So he's not going to be taking 2, 3 damage at a time. It's always going to be 1 damage hits. And then he has a 3-up save and a 4++ invulnerable save. So he's sticking around for a while. His weapons do mortal wounds as well. So he has a Vulcanite Disintegrator, which is range 18, 103, strength 5, 1 damage. That doesn't sound like that awesome, right? Strength 5, 1 damage, what's the big deal? Well, each time an attack is made with that, unmodified hit rolls of 6 do a mortal wound. So he can do mortal wounds like that. That's cool. He could use his own ability to make that happen if he wanted to. He also has Blade of the Ancestors, which is a melee weapon, +1 strength, so hitting on 6s, -4 AP, 2 damage, and each time an attack is made with that weapon, unmodified hit rolls of 6, inflict 2 mortal wounds, or 3 if the target has 1 or more judgment tokens on it, which again, he generates. So it's very easy for him to be like, hey, this is the thing I'm going to be hitting. It has judgment now. I'm going to be doing 3 mortal wounds. Dang. Yeah, so he can really lay down some hurt just on his own. But really, just seems like a really strong character. Lots of opportunity for synergy between him and other units. He counts as both a call and a high call. And so there's some ability that you have in your army list making that you can take a call and a high call. If you take Uther, you only get Uther. You don't get him and another call or him and a high call. He's your one and only. If you don't take him, you have the option of taking both a standard call and a high call. And we'll get to that now, I guess. So calls are 70 points. High calls are 40 points more, so 120 or 110 points. Basically, the call is a unit entry, and then you can pay points to give him some extra abilities and call him a high call instead. Both of these are just more flexible versions of Uther, right? They don't have as many rules. They don't have as much things prescribed for them. They're the typical trade-off between a special character and then the non-special equivalent. Yeah, you probably don't have. I probably don't have to explain this. So calls are the budget option, right? All they have is that Kindred Hero aura, so that gives them the reroll 1's aura and the judgment generation. They only do 1 judgment at a time. They don't have the special warlord trait that high calls do, including Uther. If you pay to upgrade a call to a high call, you can give judgment twice, right? So that's pretty darn good. Plus, when they kill a unit, they gain full reroll ability. So it's 40 points more, but with both a call and a high call, you get to double dip, right? You have 2 of these auras, you have two of some of these abilities that you can dish out, which is good if you're really trying to generate a lot of judgment early on, or if you want to spread out your Kindred Hero aura. Like this is something you might want to consider. I think there's enough other good stuff in the Codex that, especially in the HQs, that you probably aren't going to want to bring both a call and a high call. And again, this is one of the reasons why Uther is really good, right? If you bring a call and a high call, that's 180 points base. Uther is cheaper than that. You're getting a lot more utility out of Uther than you are out of having both a call and a high call. It just seems like Uther's very competitively priced. But the thing about the other versions, right, the call and the high call, as opposed to Uther, is that they can take relics. And there's some cool relics in here that you might want to consider. And we'll talk about those in a little bit. Right. Then looking at the rest of the HQ units, the Grimnir, the Einir Champions, and the Iron Masters, I think all 3 of these have a place. You're always going to want a call or high call or Uther, and then you're probably going to pick 1 or 2 of these other HQ units to put in your army. And they all have a role. I think some of them are more generally attractive than others. Let's start with the Grimnir, though. So the Grimnir is 80 points. You can upgrade it to a Lord Grimnir, just like you can upgrade from a call to a high call. You can pay a few extra points to get access to some additional abilities. And both of these are your Psychers, and they're good, right? They offer some nice psychic support. A lot of the spells in the Codex are attractive in a competitive standpoint. I think there are a few that you're going to lean towards, certainly more often than others, including like CP generation. There's a spell that generates CP for you, and the way CP works, it's always tight now. So that's a really attractive thing. There are things that can auto-remove, just straight up remove models from the board. There are spells that remove invulnerable saves. There are ones that increase your durability. Like all of those things are attractive. I think at least the CP generation is going to kind of be a staple choice if you're taking a Grimnir. And yeah, you can get a couple other benefits from them. So they have ability to add 1 to combat attrition test taken within 6 inches of the unit. And then they have these Corv units, like these little robot dudes that are with them. And they, those can basically be sacrificed to ignore Perils of the Warp, which is cool. Right? Just gives them a little bit more sustainability. If you upgrade to a Lord Grimnir, you can cast an additional power, and I think that's probably worth it. Unless you are strapped on points, right? I think it's probably worth it because then you get your built-in CP generation spell plus 2 more utilitarian or offensively minded spells. So you're going to be able to do a little bit more with that, and for 25 points, it seems worth it. So yeah, I think that's pretty easy data slate. Yeah. Then there are the Einir Champions. Those guys are 90 points base. You get a model with movement 5, weapon ballistic skill of 2, strength, toughness, wounds of 5, 4 attacks, 9 leadership, and a 2-up save. These guys are basically the Brood Lords to the Hearthguard's Gene Stealers. Right? So they're useful, they're respectable on their own, and in general, we're not talking about this particular Tyranids Codex, whatever, right? Like they're their own thing, but really you want to bring them if you're bringing a bunch of their comrades, right? And that's true here too, right? Like if you're bringing a bunch of Hearthguard, you're going to be having a board presence. You're going to be employing a strategy that this guy's going to fit into very well. If you're not bringing a bunch of Hearthguard, then he's going to be kind of the odd child out, and you're not necessarily going to get as much out of him as you would other HQ units. So he has a bunch of weapons, just like the Hearthguard do. He has a bunch of weapons. They're all respectable, good weapons, right? And you can upgrade those and give him a bunch of relics that are really darn cool to make him even beefier and hit harder. But I think the things that are worth maybe more attention here are his special rules. So he has the Mass Driver Accelerators special rule. Basically means when he charges, he has a chance of doing mortal wounds. That procs if you roll 6 and it's either a natural 6 or beats the highest toughness characteristic in the target unit. He also allows Einir Hearthguard to reroll wounds of 1 within 6 inches, which is a really nice buff on top of everything else, especially looking at their weapon profiles. There's a good chunk of your misses that are going to be 1s. Of your failure to wounds that are going to be 1s. So you're getting a lot of mileage out of rerolling 1s on Hearthguard. And so that's why I say that he's really going to be a force multiplier for them, more so than your army as a whole. He also has an Exo Armor special rule, subtracts 1 from the damage characteristics against attacks against him, and a Ram Shield, which means that melee attacks subtract 1 to the wound roll against him. So he's beefy. He's going to do some damage, especially if you give him some relics. He's going to really shine with a unit of Hearthguard. He has a built-in Wavefield Crest, which is basically this thing that gives him an additional wound and gives him a 4-up invulnerable save. That's good, especially if he's going to be, like in a land fortress or something. Great. If you have a bunch of Hearthguard and him in a land fortress, have fun. Great. Take the Wavefield Crest. But he can give that up for a Teleport Crest, just like the Hearthguard can, and they can all, deep strike, which is obviously useful. And so he can do what they can do, really. I think either way, he's going to be able to lay down some hurt. All right, and then we have Brokir Iron Masters, and aside from calls, the Iron Master is my most favorite HQ. For one thing, he's just a badass, right? Like, he's got a hammer, he's got a gun, he's a cool dwarf dude. Yeah, that's awesome. But he just has a ton of really awesome rules to him. So just like Grimnir's and Calls, you can upgrade him to be a Forge Master. So the Iron Master is 80 points, Forge Master is 105 points. I think one of these is going to be an auto-clued in most armies, right? They're that good. For 80 points base, the Iron Master is movement 5, weapon skill 3, ballistic skill 2, strength, toughness, wounds 4, 3 attacks, leadership 9, a 4-up save. He has an Ironkin assistant and then 3 ECOG. So it's a multi-model unit that has a bunch of perks for being a multi-model unit. He has the special rule of multispectral visor. It says in your command phase, you can select a unit within 9 inches and add 1 to that unit's hit rolls during the shooting phase, basically. Brokir Guild allows him to repair D3 lost wounds on a vehicle or exo frame model. So that includes Thunderkin, right? Or exo frame models. So you can repair D3 lost wounds, which is really awesome. There's a limit of that once per turn, but still. D3 lost wounds that get +1 if there's an ECOG left in the unit. So as long as you have 1 ECOG, you have D3 +1 lost wounds regeneration per turn, which is awesome. The Ironkin Assistant means that they can advance and shoot without failing actions. That's right, the unit can perform actions, which makes them even more useful. And then the ECOGs don't count for morale and stuff like that. So just like a really sturdy unit, which is awesome. So the one thing about this unit, though, that's weird is the ECOGs each of the ECOGs has a different weapon set, and all of those weapons are fine. Like, they're fine, but like, it's kind of like needlessly complicated. I don't know. Like, I would rather just have them all be the same, but it's flavorful. It's cool that they're all different, right? Like, one guy has a blowtorch, one guy has the vice clamps and all this other stuff. So it's cool, but complicated. It's not, anyway. It's not like having one blowtorch is going to totally make a difference. but it's an option, right? The Forge Master, again, more expensive, but it reduces the command point cost of war gear strats by 1. And there's a bunch of war gear strats, right? Like for the med pack, for the searchlight, all those stuff, right? All those little war gear options that we had in all of our different units. Most of those cost 1 CP. There's sometimes where they cost 2. But it reduces the cost of war gear strats by 1. So that makes that way more accessible. Very, very useful if you're making an investment into those war gear options, which, given their just built-in utility, I think is a good thing. So that makes the Forge Master really attractive. It makes all attacks mortal wounds on 6s to wound, including from Judgment, right? So if you're getting Judgment tokens, right, and you're proccing on a Judgment token, that means that there's going to be a 6 to wound, right, in that case. And so you can get mortal wound generation just from that, which is awesome. So he's offensively minded as well. He's not just a support guy. He's not. So yeah, just a really solid unit. He offers good to excellent offensive buffs and repairs your units. It's hard to argue with that for 100 points, right? Like 100 points to get that much utility is awesome. So, as far as HQs go, I'm looking at Uther or a High Call, and I'm looking at a Forge Master, and they're just that good. I think that's going to be the baseline for most lists out of the HQ group. All right, cool. So let's take a look at the relics, huh? We talked about how the data slates. Let's look at the relics and see how we might tweak some of these characters. Now, for the most part, this is, relics are going to go on characters. There's a few of them that you can get to go on, like Thayan or Hessier or something like that, right? Like you can get them to go into other units, which is interesting, right? It's a way to jam some relics in to non-HQ slots, way to get more relics in your list if you really want them. But yeah, let's take a look at them. I'm not going to go through every single one, just because not all of them are super exciting at first glance. Not all of these are super amazing that I'm going to talk about, but they're ones that stood out to me enough that I was like, yeah, let's talk about that. So the Extractor is a mass hammer that does mortal wounds and removes a -1 hit penalty for Einir champions. So it has a profile of double strength, AP -3, D3 plus 3 damage, and then unmodified hit rolls of 6 suffer D3 plus 3 mortal wounds instead. So a pretty good weapon if you're looking to build a beatstick Einir champion. Something to consider, right? That mortal wound generation is good, and it removes the -1 hit penalty that would otherwise accompany the mass hammer on him. So just kind of a nice double dip, and a nice win there to get an even stronger champion. The first knife is a relic that basically gives a call an additional attack, and if that attack hits, it does D3 mortal wounds plus 1 additional mortal wound for each judgment token on the target. So potentially like 6 mortal wounds just from shanking a guy, I guess, plus the damage that they do otherwise. So that's a fair amount of damage output from just one relic, and the fact that it's mortal wounds is a huge perk. So yeah, I think that's worth looking at, especially if you're building a call that is meant to be melee focused. There are 2 other relics that work for calls and make them stronger in close combat. And I think, outside of the cases where you really need mortal wounds, both of these are probably going to give you a better output. The thing about the first knife is that it's mortal wounds, right? So it's going to come through in a pinch if your call's kind of trapped and is going against something that conventional weapons can't harm. If you really need those mortal wounds, it's going to be kind of a safety net for you. But there are these 2 other weapons I think are going to be better for a generalist melee approach. The first one is the Hearth Fist, or the Hearth Fist, however you want to pronounce that. So it replaces a mass gauntlet or a concussion gauntlet. It has a profile of plus 4 strength, -3 AP, 3 damage. Each time an attack is made with the weapon, in a model in a unit that has one or more judgment tokens, that attack has damage characteristic of 4 instead. So really quite a bit of damage output there. Also removes the hit penalty for some of those weapons, and just gives you, again, a double leg up, right? You get more damage without a hit penalty. It's a solid weapon. The other relic is the Flare. Again, a melee weapon that replaces a plasma axe. That's strength +2, AP -3, 2 damage, and it makes 3 additional attacks with that weapon each time it fights. So +1 strength, +3 attacks for an axe call. That's just, again, a lot of damage. Something that's going to be useful pretty consistently. And right, you can recoup those. You can recoup those potential mortal wounds through higher efficacy of your weapon against a diversity of targets here, using the Flare as opposed to the First Knife. So again, First Knife, awesome kind of panic button option. Hearth Fist, Flare, both of them give a better or an additional boost that might be more useful generally. Wayfarer's Grace is a relic that allows the bearer to regen 1 lost wound in its command phase. So that's always good, right? Healing, always good. And then you stand back up on a 3+, kind of like Celestine style, right? So you're getting a more durable character there. So it seems like putting this on someone that you really wanted to stick around, like your Iron Master, Forge Master, probably isn't a bad idea. And the last one is Grudge's Ends, and this is a relic that works for a character with the bolt weapon, and it improves the AP and damage characteristic of that bolt weapon by 1, and also allows that that weapon to automatically wound any target with a judgment token on it, which is awesome. Right, just automatically wounds. That's good. So, if you're looking for a shootier option, this is it, right? Most of these things are melee based. If you want a shooty option, this is a pretty darn good one. And then looking at stratagems, again, not going to go through every single one. This video is long enough as it is, and I ramble. But looking at the ones that stood out the most to me. So starting with Accelerated Response, that's 1 CP. It adds 12 inches to the movement of accelerated units. So that's your Pioneers, your Sagittars, your Land Fortresses. It gets all those things to move faster, right? It's just plus 12 movement, which is awesome. So good for, getting your, it's not so great for Sagittars, right? Because you're probably going to have more than one of them. And so you're going to want them to move in concert. But, let's say you want just one of them to go up. Sure, do that. But it's really great for Land Fortresses, right? That you have a big unit in, you need to get up the board for Alpha Strike type deal. Or for Pioneers, if you need them to, go sniff out an objective or something, right? Like, that is just a really powerful stratagem for 1 CP, just to be able to move that much for an army where movement is that important. Outflanking Pioneers, speak of the devil, right? Outflanking Pioneers allows Pioneers to go into reserve. So you use it in the movement phase and they go into reserve. You can't bring them back in the same turn, but super useful for kind of objective grabbing, or if you bring the Beamer, getting them on the side of the board where maybe you do have a really awesome beam shot, right? You could do that using this CP. Like that would be, that would be an interesting play, right? If you could just get a really nice beam shot, line up everything you want just so in your following turn, that would be cool, but risky, right? Probably more likely to be used for secondaries or for grabbing objectives in a more predictable way, right? And then Point Blank Fusillade, or is it volley? Right? Point Blank Fusillade. It's 2 CP. It allows infantries and bikers to shoot in combat. This is a stratagem that, again, is very similar to Tau. I think there are a lot of clear analogs in the Tau and Marine codices in this book, right? And that makes sense lore-wise. It makes sense given the kind of feel that they're going for the army. And a lot of this stuff is kind of just ripping straight off of, it's a very thinly veiled echo of those codices in some places, and this is one of those. So point blank fusillade allows you to shoot in combat, which excellent, especially given the profile on the weapons and how durable the units are, right? One of the things about point blank volley in the Tau Codex, Tau infantry aren't going to be alive to use their weapons. But you know what? Votann models are. So they're actually going to be able to get a lot out of this because they're going to be able to be in combat. They're going to be able to be there and not just die right away. So yeah, pretty powerful stratagem given the hybrid nature of these guys being durable and shooty at the same time. Combat surgery, 1 CP. This is one of those war gear things that the Iron Master can make free. So very good in that way. Free stratagem, great. Regain D3 models in a unit with a med pack. Yeah, just D3 models on your like Hearthkin, for example. I'll do that. That sounds good to me. I like that. Right, so that again allows your scoring units to be on the table and play the game. You're gonna want that. It just seems like a good one. Multi-wave system jammer, 2 CP this time. Disable auras for a unit within 12 inches of a comms unit. So again, if you take comms, which is the thing that lets you get the reroll 1s buff from 24 inches away, so you're going to want to do that anyway. But for 2 CP, you can use that to remove all auras from an opponent too. That's just nasty, right? So many armies depend on auras to be effective. Votann included, right? Being able to turn that off is really useful. So you might be starting to see why the Grimnir might be worth its points in the way that allows you to regen some CP, right? Because you're going to want to spend them. Ion Storm is 1 or 2 CP depending on the size of the unit. Makes your ion weapons also deal mortal wounds on 6s. So Ion Blaster Hearthkin, like a unit of 10, or even if you brought a unit of 20 of them, running this thing, you'd get a fair number of procs and deal a nice number of mortal wounds. If you have an Iron Master nearby, he's going to be able to buff them to do even more, and it's just like it's just nasty, right? Ion Storm seems like one of those things that you could build a list around. And then there's a bunch of other stratagems that improve your hit chances or wound rolls or cause extra damage, right? That's what most of the stratagems are, really. And yeah, they all have a place. They're all useful if you're bringing the units that they apply to. But these are the ones that really stood out to me. Like, just these ones are just, for the most part, things that I would want to use every game as much as I could. All right, so we talked about the relics, we talked about stratagems, we talked about the data slates, and we talked about the special roles. So you have an idea about how the army works out of the box. Let's take a look at the leagues in brief and discuss what that means for how you're going to customize your list. I have this roughly in order of quality, not totally, but I do think the Greater Thurian League is the best. I think it's the most competitive or at least the most reliable pick. It's flexible. You're always going to get something out of it. And if you're always getting something out of it, I think that's always good. It also has Uther, which is awesome, right? We talked about how cool Uther is. So, yeah, really compelling choice. Units in the Greater Thurian League can reroll 1 hit or 1 wound roll per unit. So, like, that's a free command reroll for each of your units throughout the game. So huge value there. Targets always count as having an additional judgment token, and so that means you always have you're always going to be getting a like a 5 up proc on that as long as you have at least 1 judgment token on it, right? So your minimum is 2, basically. And then there's a strat that allows calls to give 2 tokens instead of 1. Not bad, right? Like, this is another way that you can get more judgment tokens out in a hurry. There's also a Warlord trait to refund Stratagem CP, which is convenient with that stratagem, because you're going to want to use that stratagem, and then you're also going to want to refund the CP for it. So, if you're investing in a Warlord trait, that's not a bad one to do. Trans-Hyperion Alliance is the league that gives offensive buffs and offers some sneaky deployment options. So it has a +1 to hit for every unit that's below starting strength. So as soon as you lose a guy, you get +1 to hit. Not a bad perk, right? Like +1 to hit means that most units are going to be hitting on 2s, right? And then 6s get +1 armor penetration, and you can re-roll wounds of 1 against anything with a judgment token on it. So that is, really strong as well. I think that's a little bit more dependent than the Great Arthurian League, a little bit more variable, and so I don't think it's quite as good as Great Arthurian League, but still a really strong choice. Warlord trait allows for 3 units to redeploy or go into reserves for free above the cap. So even if you have half your army in reserves, you can put 3 more units in there on top of it, and be, again, super sneaky. So you're punching harder, and you can be a bit sneakier about to land those punches just in the right place at the right time. So a good alternative if you're not taking Great Arthurian League. The Cronus Hegemony is a league that hits a bit harder in close combat. So if you're going for Berserkers, if you're going for a bunch of Berserkers and Hearthguard, maybe this is what you want to take. But I think it's kind of a down a tier, right? It's definitely down a tier from Trans-Hyperion Alliance and Great Arthurian League. +1 strength, +1 attack on the charge, really good perks, right? +1 AP if the target has 2 or more judgment tokens on it, though. So if you're able to pump out those judgment tokens, you're going to be hitting even harder. They have a relic that allows the bearer to ignore invulnerable saves too. So you could put that on your Einir champion and really go through some characters or knights or whatever. The Ymir Conglomerate, I don't know, Ymir? I don't know. You tell me in the comments how to pronounce that. Yeah, Ymir Conglomerate basically gives your army better technology. I kind of think about this as like the Borkan equivalent. Improves, for obvious reasons here, it improves your range by 4 inches on ranged weapons, and gives your units a 5-up invulnerable save. Super good, right? That's sure. We'll say that's super good, right? That's good. 5-up invulnerable save for everybody on a list where a bunch of things don't have invulnerable saves. Yeah, we'll go with that. That's good. It is redundant. It just makes everybody more tanky, right? Like they already have void armor, and now they're getting a 5-up invulnerable save. A lot of weapons aren't going to come into play even there, right? Like if you have void armor already, there are, a much smaller set of weapons where you're even going to need the invulnerable save. So I guess that's why it's not as good as I might rank it otherwise, right? If you didn't have void armor, this would rank higher. If the model has a 2-up save, they get a 4++ instead. So right, there's a few guys that have the 2-up armor save, so they get a 4-up invulnerable save, which is good. And then they get +1 AP against judged units within half range, and that's tough, right? Like you get a longer range, but that's only extending your half range by 2 inches. Like, yeah, that's going to be tougher, especially given the relatively short range of most of their weapons. So that doesn't come into play as much as you would hope. And then the Urani Surtur Regulates just makes your army tougher. So +1 toughness, and you reroll morale checks. They have a relic to make the character untargetable unless they're the closest, so that's good, right? You can do some sneaky stuff with that. Attacks against enemy units with 0 tokens count as having 1, so it doesn't add 1 or anything, but it makes it so that they basically always count as having 1. It's not exactly the same as always having 1 because of the wording about how some things proc and whatever, but yeah. Units with 0 tokens count as having 1 token. I tend to put these more defensive leagues lower down because the Codex already has a fair amount of durability baked into it. Like we talked about the Ymir Conglomerate, having that 5++ isn't going to come up as much as you might think even. Having +1 toughness, probably going to come up even less because of the way that the wound table works. I mean, I guess it would move you from like toughness 4 to toughness 5. So like bolters are wounding you on a 5 now instead of a 4. But yeah, so it has a place, but it just doesn't seem like it does as much for you as you might think. I'd much rather have the benefits of the Greater Thurian League than the Conglomerate or the Regulate benefits. All right, so this has gone on long enough, right? Let's wrap it up. Let's put some closing thoughts on it. So, in general, I think the Codex is pretty darn strong. I know it's bold take, brave and bold. I know I'm going to get a lot of heat for that. It's my hot take because that's a relatively high-powered Codex, at least on paper, right? We'll have to see how it plays out, right? There are some things about it that could pose issues, right? Depending on how much terrain really affects how well they work, how people respond to judgment, right? Like with the way that judgment works, there could be, some mind games that you play with your opponent, and maybe your opponent's going to win those mind games, or maybe not. I'm not sure, right? So there are probably ways of getting around some of these things that could muck up the performance in reality. And then of course there's GW too, right? Like they could come in here with a FAQ or something and just totally gut the army after a couple weeks of big sales. We'll see how it goes. But as it stands right now, I think that they look good, right? They look good. They have a lot going for them. And there seems to be a few different routes you could take. Not a ton, right? There's only so many units in this book. There's only so many ways you could build this, but there seems to be a few different ways that could be broadly characterized, maybe as more of a shooty list versus more of a close combat oriented list. So there's a few different ways you could go with it. But in general, I think, a strong starting list is going to be something that's mechanized. So you have a fair number of transports in it with a few real punchy units in it. So, there are more gimmicky lists that you could do, like, a bunch of Ion Blaster dudes with the Forge Master and then the Ion Strat, and that could just be like your thing. But assuming that we're not going quite down that road, a more general list could be something like, a General Thurian League battalion with Uther and a Forge Master, and then you have 30 kin with at least 10 of them with Ion Blasters. That's by unit, right? So either 10 or 20 of them with blasters. Like 10 Hearthguard, like 2 units of 5. Maybe one of them has a teleporter crest. And then 4 Sagittar. So you can get all your troops in there. And then a Land Fortress for your Hearthguard. Plus some characters, right? And then a couple Thunderkin, so like a unit of Thunderkin with maybe the beam weapon would be cool, and then a unit of Pioneers. Like that all adds up to be about 2,000 points, depending on the details, right? And I think that would probably be a pretty good starting point, and not a lot you could really complain about in that. I say that, and now you're just going to complain about the list in the comments, but I think that that's a pretty solid list, right? That all those things, even if the Codex changes, all those things are probably going to be somewhat relevant regardless of how the Codex evolves over time. So yeah, I think that's probably what I would do if I was able to resist not able to resist the temptation of picking up these things. Again, I really, the more that I look at this model range, the more into it I am. I wasn't that excited about the models when they were previewing it, but going through this Codex, understanding what the models do, hopefully, and spending more time looking at it, the more they popped up in the back of my head, and it's like, yeah, They look really cool. So I'm excited about the book. I am curious to see how it plans out, and especially what Games Workshop's response is to their performance over the first few months here. It'll be really interesting to see. So let me know what you think in the comments below. What are you planning on doing if you're going to be picking up Leagues of Votann? What's kind of list are you going to be building? I want to hear in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching and happy wargaming. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. Good news, we have more of the Invasive Wargaming model back in stock, so if you're interested in picking one up, you didn't get one before or you want more, check out the links in the description below. Otherwise, I just want to say thanks again for watching, especially all the folks over on Patreon. This channel wouldn't happen without them, so thanks to Jack and Acker, Durza, Everett Keller, Robbie Goodwin, Jose Gomez, Drew Prattley, Michael Byrne, Zealous Brimstone, Scott Heater, Stephen Cowan, Jared Egler, and Shifty.